Everyone is capable of both great good and great evil, and how you choose to lead your life is up to you. Hi, my name is Jessa, and please join me as we look together top 10 evil people in history who invented unspeakable creations. And before we begin, in the last video I was in, top 10 bizarre historical facts and events school never taught us, I gave you guys a riddle. Did you get it? The riddle was, what invention lets you look right through a wall? The answer is, drumroll please, a window. Your next riddle will be at the end of this video. Anyways, let's get started. Number 10. Giulia Tofana. In the 1600s, women who were left under the control of malignant husbands who would physically harm and control them was a rather common issue, and the general rule was that unless your spouse passed away, that was the only time a woman could be granted her freedom. The active contents inside the vial with the artwork of St. Nicholas were unknown, but mostly it was filled with arsenic, lead, and possibly belladonna. It was colorless, tasteless, and therefore easy to mix with many other substances like wine or water. It was called by the name Aqua Tofana, and it was named after the suspected Giulia Tofana, as she was the main distributor and ringleader of this secret sauce. The actual creator might have actually been another woman who was caught later on. The poisoning of Aqua Tofana would go unnoticed, as its symptoms would mimic other illnesses that were prominent at the time. First dosage would mimic a cold, the third dosage digestive issues, and the fourth was death. It was so effective and helpful that when the poison was used in a slow active state, it would give the victims the assumption that they were dying and would write a will and repent. And if the provider of the poison changed their mind, the antidote was simply lemon juice and vinegar. Although the invention of this poison substance was eventually discontinued as so many had been caught with the subject, it lasted for the length that it did due to the assumption that it was a cosmetic, when really it was for women of this time a vial of liberation and freedom. Number 9. Vladimir Demikhov. A very famous Soviet scientist by the name of Vladimir Demikhov was known for his innovation, organ transplants, which had saved many lives in the medical world by extending life from near-death events. However, how he came to this is just as disturbing and concerning as it was revolutionary and innovative, and he would transplant a number of vital organs between dogs. But then he decided to experiment even further by sewing together a two-headed dog. He and his assistants would attempt to operate not just a few times, but over 24 times to create a functioning two-headed dog, and it was at the 24th time it was widely publicized. It was even featured on Life magazine, and unsurprisingly was considered a very dark, horrifying creation that had been beheld. He sewed together the head of a neck of a small dog named Shavka onto the neck of a large stray German shepherd named Brodyaga. The mad scientist created an unnatural creation at a disturbing cost. For the surgery itself, Demikhov amputated Shavka the lower body below the forelegs, keeping her heart and lungs connected until just before the transplant. Then he attached Shavka to the upper body of a corresponding incision of Brodyaga's neck. The operation lasted 3.5 hours, although both could function, and here Shavka ended up dying as she was not attached to Brodyaga's stomach, so whatever she ate fell out. And tragically, the two animals died 4 days later due to the damage of a crucial vein. The previous pair of dogs lasted for a month before they too died in a fatal end, and Vladimir also had no intention to stop his animal cruelty experiments and would continue trying until his death. Number 8. MK Ultra. Project MK Ultra was an illegal human experimentation program designed and undertaken by the CIA and intended to develop procedures and identifying drugs that could be used during interrogations to weaken people and force confessions through brainwashing and psychological torture. MK Ultra used numerous methods to manipulate its subjects' mental state and brain functions, such as a covert administration of high doses of psychoactive drugs and other chemicals without the subject's consent, electric shocks, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual, and other forms of torment. MK Ultra was preceded by Project Artichoke, and it was organized through the CIA's office and coordinated with the US Army's biological warfare labs. The program engaged in illegal activities, including the use of US and Canadian citizens as unwitting test subjects. Investigative efforts were hampered by CIA Director Richard Helm's order that all MK Ultra files be destroyed in 1973. The Church Committee and Rockefeller Commission's investigations relied on the sworn testimony of direct participants and on the small number of documents that survived Helm's order. In 1977, a Freedom of Information Act requested uncovered a cache of 20,000 documents relating to MK Ultra, which led to Senate hearings, but some of the surviving information about MK Ultra was declassified in 2001. Number 7. Philip Zimbardo. An American psychologist and a professor at Stanford University, was known for his involvement, leadership, and administration on the research of the Stanford prison experiment. He was heavily criticized as the experiment was seen unethical and scientific reasons. The Stanford prison experiment was a psychological experiment conducted to stimulate a prison environment to examine the effects of situational variables on participants' reaction and behaviors. Participants were recruited from the local community with an ad in the newspaper offering $15 per day to male students who wanted to participate in a psychological study of prison life. Keep in mind, $15 back then is roughly $114 today. Volunteers were chosen after assessments of psychological stability and then randomly assigned to being prisoners or prison guards. Over the following 5 days, psychological harm of the prisoners by the guards became increasingly brutal. After psychologist Christina Maslach visited to evaluate the conditions, she was upset to see how study participants were behaving, and she confronted Zimbardo, and he ended the experiments on the 6th day. The SBE had been referenced and heavily criticized as an example of an unethical psychological experiment, as a harm inflicted on the participants in this and the other experiments in the post-World War II era. Because of this experiment, it prompted American universities to improve their ethical requirements and institutional review on human experiments to prevent them from being similarly harmed. The goal of Zimbardo's primary reason for the conducting of the experiment was to focus on the power of roles, rules, symbols, group identity, and situational validation of behavior that generally would repulse ordinary individuals. But with one positive result of the study is that it altered the way the US prisons are run. For example, juveniles accused of federal crimes are no longer housed before trial with adult prisoners due to the risk of violence against them. Number 6. Phalaris and Perillos of Athens. Throughout history, humans in general have created an enclave of many extraordinary things, and as civilizations go, for some reason in our distant past, they had an obsession of creating agonizing means and the inflictions of others. Perillos of Athens had created something that at first glance may seem like a work of art, but its uses had been a thing of torment: the brazen bull. The beautiful bronze statue casted in ancient Greece was invented between 570 and 554 BC. The statue was actually commissioned by the reign of Phalaris, an evil tyrant in Sicily. So many would think that he's actually the real inventor, or more or less had the idea. This tyrant was also known for eating new as his new cruel torment device, and the bull was cast hollow and was used as a fire would be built below, and its design was that it would be opened and a person would be forced inside. The fire would start underneath the person and it would burn as the smoke and steam would escape from the bull's nose. Incense was placed inside to counteract the smell of burnt flesh, and it is said that it was a series of tubes built inside the statue to design to distort the screams of the victim and make them sound like an animal. Phalaris was a piece of work, as he wanted to test the sound system of the bull, that he even pushed Perillos, the man who created the bull, for him into the belly and lit a fire under him. And then he later released him before he pushed him off a cliff. But by sheer karma, Phalaris died in a bull himself, as the city was taken over by Telemachus in 554 BC. Number 5. Lytle S. Adams. After hearing about the vicious attacks of Pearl Harbor on the radio, Lytle S. Adams developed a unique plan of vengeance against the Japanese Imperial Army with the Bat Bomb. The bomb consisted a bomb-shaped casting over 1,000 compartments, each containing a hibernating Mexican free-tailed bat with a small timed incendiary bomb attached. Dropped from a bomber at dawn, the castings would deploy a parachute in mid-flight and open a release of bats, which would then disperse to eaves and attics in a 20-40 mile radius. Adams stated that the bat was the lowest form of animal life, and that until now, reasons for its creations have remained unexplained. He went on to espouse that bats were created by God to wait this hour to play their part in the scheme of free human existence, to frustrate any attempt of those who dared desecrate our way of this life. This weird device was then of course proved by President Roosevelt, who's remarked that his friend wasn't crazy, but the idea was worth looking into. Either way, after the conducted of a few tests, the program was eventually cancelled after it was estimated a use of $2 million, or in today's value $32 million, was wasted on this invention. When it comes to war, humans showcase the worst of the worst if it means of expanding their nation's political planning, and if you're in the military, there's an internal conflict to fill in your nationalism and your internal duty to serve the country, and you forget your economical issues. When it comes to the invention of war, as it has been showcased throughout history time and time again, even in current unfortunate events, the creation leads to genocide by means of invention of different kinds of warfare. Developed by Fritz Haber, who was a professor at the University of Karlsruhe, was a brilliant chemist who invented the industrial scale productions of ammonia-based fertilizer. Alongside Frederick Guthrie, the two was noted as the ones who weaponized and synthesized a vescent chemical warfare agent called mustard gas, a widely used weapon used during World War I by both sides of the conflict with particularly harmful and deadly effects. It was responsible for the 1,205,655 non-fatal casualties and 91,198 deaths. The effects range from minor symptoms such as skin irritation and conjunctivitis to severe lung damage when inhaled. Despite the horrific use of mustard gas during World War I, there was a silver lining: the discovery of the first modern chemotherapeutic agent based on observations of World War I survivors exposed to mustard gas. The studies eventually launched an era of cancer chemotherapy research. Number 3, Oliver Winchester. An American businessman and politician named Oliver Winchester was best known for his founding, manufacturing, the marketing of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, aka the Winchester rifle. The first official Winchester rifle was a model in 1866. Repeating rifles was not widely used until after the war, when they became increasingly popular with the civilians. Military authorities concentrated primarily on perfecting breech-loading single-shot rifles for many more years. His ownership was then passed to his son, who died of TB, and his wife Sarah Winchester ended up moving to California with the inheritance as she began to make the famed Winchester house a haunted mystery house due to her fear of spirits being murdered by the rifle. Number 2, Dow and Company. Originally developed to simply enhance the growth of soybeans, Agent Orange was weaponized and used extensively during the Vietnam War. During the war, Dow, Monsanto, and other companies were compelled by the US government to produce Agent Orange under the US Defense Production Act of 1950. Used in large quantities, it was a powerful herbicide used by the United States to deforest the jungles and destroy Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army crops. The United States military sprayed upon up to 20 million gallons of herbicides over Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia from 1961 through 1971, covering over 4.5 million acres. Agent Orange was often proven afterwards to cause very serious health problems for both Vietnamese people and returning US military personnel and their families. Among were rashes, birth defects, and severe neurological problems, as well as cancer. This military action has caused the nation of Vietnam. Since then, the country has reported over 400,000 of their people were maimed and killed by the harm of the herbicides, that 500,000 of their children have been born with birth defects caused by the exposure of Agent Orange. The US courts, of course, have constantly ruled that Dow and other manufacturers bear no responsibility for the development and the use of Agent Orange during the Vietnam War, and have dismissed all legal claims to the contrary. And finally, number 1, Oppenheimer. An American theoretical physicist and director of the Manhattan Project Los Alamos Laboratory during World War II, is often called the father of the atomic bomb, causing the destruction and devastation of the Japanese as it resulted the tragedies of 200,000 civilians and military personnel. The ethics of these bombings and the roles in Japan's surrender are subjects of debate. Oppenheimer did important research of the theoretical astronomy, as well as the quantum field theory and the extensive of quantum electric dynamics. But with his interests that led him to the development of these weapons still hold to this day dire consequences on the lives that it would affect. In a very famous quote to this recognition, he has said, "If the radiance of 1,000 suns were to burst at once in the sky, that would be like the splendor of the mighty one. Now I have become death, the shatter of worlds." In a meeting he had with President Truman, he was distraught at the invention, as it was now readily usable at the hands of practically anyone. And President Truman was infuriated at Oppenheimer when he said, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands," responding that he, Truman, bore sole responsibility for the decision on the atomic bomb against the Japanese, which later Truman said, "I don't want to see that son of a bee in this office ever again." The Treaty of the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons aimed to reduce the spread of nuclear weapons, but its effectiveness has been questioned. Modernization of weapons continue to this day. Bombs alike have been proved with its massive casualties and results to the devastation, eradication, genocide of innocent people, and the tragedy of wars it inhibits in our modern times. That's all for today, and I hope you learned something cool. And for your next riddle, are you ready? What has a bottom at the top? Be sure to put your answer in the comments below, and I'll reveal the answer to the next video: Top 10 Messed Up Acts Performed by Evil Queens. That's all for today. Thank you for joining me. My name is Jessa. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see your beautiful faces in the next one.